Welcome to another episode of the Doug and Mike Show. I am Mike.
And I'm Doug, and we have real conversations with real people. Mike, who is our amazing guest today?
Our latest episode, Doug, is pretty outstanding. We have made some time with Jarvis Bedford, a battalion chief with the Tallahassee Fire Department. Jarvis, thanks for coming on the show, bud.
Thank you for having me, Mike and Doug.
We were lucky enough to sit down with him and have a conversation, and today talk about not only his experiences and his time and tenure with the local here with the IFF and with the Tallahassee Fire Department, but more importantly, he was a task force leader out on the recent deployments to the Gulf Coast to help those areas out.
Well, and another important thing, Mike, is that it's timely. We really this is a story that's still unfolding as we speak. So we're just happy that Jarvis was able to make time, just so soon after coming home.
All right, so Chief, and excuse me if I throw Chief in there because that's that's how we formally refer to you here as I'm on the same shift with you. So occasionally I might accidentally refer to you formally. That's all right, isn't it?
It's all right. That'll work.
So give us a little background. Tell us about your journey. You're not originally from Florida, so give us a little snapshot of your life and how you got to where you're at today.
Okay. So, wow. I'd say probably I was approached in 1987. I was born and raised in Dover, Delaware. Grew up the majority of my life there, and I moved here around 90. But at the time in middle school, I had a good friend of mine, close friend, one of my best friends, that had been in the volunteer department there in Dover, Delaware. His father, and he approached me, asked me, would I like to try it? And at that time, young, not a whole lot going on. I did. I kind of stepped into it. And at the time, it's kind of funny because I remember I was 16. I had to have my dad sign to authorize, my involvement with Dover.
Wow, that's cool.
So from there, it grew, the interest, as far as being a firefighter.
So you had no family members in the fire service?
No. So my dad and my uncle, both were ex-military. My father served a tour in Vietnam, and he moved on when he got back and went in the postal service. And my uncle retired from it. So I was definitely the first as far as the fire service.
Got a chance to come here to Tallahassee. You had a connection with Tallahassee, didn't you?
So my dad remarried, and my stepsister, she was going to school at Florida A&M, and I flew down one summer to drive back with her. And of course, my interest in the fire service, I went to Station 1. I'll never forget that downtown. Talked to a couple of guys, and at that time, they said Florida was really hurting for paid firemen. Some things fell through. I tried to enlist in the military, but at a very young age, I was diagnosed with epilepsy and had to be off medication for so many years before you could enlist. So I just kind of felt like everything worked out. It was like part of God's plan there. And those guys told me that, man, that's all it took, man. I packed up and head down here.
Started with the fire department here. I met you when I came on the job in Tallahassee in '99. Ended up we were living down the street from each other, and fortunate enough to eventually get on the same station with the same crew. So we got some great experiences together. I've always enjoyed the experiences we've had, and been kind of a little bit of everything from technical rescue to IFF and union leadership. You served on the union board, right?
Yes. So started as a shift steward, and then kind of worked myself up to vice president, and then the last position that I held was union president for 2 terms.
Got a little bit of everything there.
So yeah, I tell you, it's that brotherhood, and just the position that you hold, which you guys know. I mean, as union leadership, it's just very gratifying. I mean, it's not always, you're dealing between members, and there's always administration, and at times, you're dealing with local government. So
yeah.
You got that right.
So give us, so we'll move right into, so now how many years have you, as we do the interview, how many years do you have with TFD?
25 this year. This August, May 25. I've actually just submitted my my papers to enter the drop.
All right. Great.
Well, that's a very, very distinguished career to make it to that milestone.
Yeah, congrats on that for sure.
Chief, you are a member of USAR, and why don't you explain to the listeners what USAR is about?
Okay, so USAR is Urban Search and Rescue, which is funded through the federal government, which is the Federal Emergency Management. And Florida, we actually have state assets. Back in 2004, 2005, when we had a series of hurricanes, they saw the need for state assets. And at that point, they allocated funds throughout the country. I think, obviously Florida, because of the threat of hurricanes here on the coast, they were able to do a little more to add more teams. And really, that's where it started. Originally, they had throughout the regions in Florida, most of the teams comprised of several different departments, within the area. For instance, Tallahassee started at one point. We had Quincy, which is just west of us, Quincy Fire, as well as a portion of the Division of Forestry. But now it is all now Tallahassee Fire Department personnel.
How many teams are in the state?
Currently, there are 8 active. At one point, there were 9, but there are 8. Out of the 8, there are 2 that are actually federal funded teams, which is down in the South Florida area, Florida 1 and 2, which is Miami-Dade, and several of the departments in that area.
And those teams are they're all comprised of the firefighters from the local departments, right?
Correct. There are within those teams, however, there are a few that are attached to those teams that are not actually, fire department personnel. Not many. For instance, some of the larger teams actually have under their medical specialist, they may have a doctor, and then a lot of teams have structural engineers. For instance, we have one as well that's not a Tallahassee fire personnel per se.
So why did they set these teams up? I mean, why don't the local fire departments just handle this business when these storms come through or these big, disasters happen?
Well, the reason for that, for one, the amount of training. I mean, so the USAR, the Urban Search and Rescue groups are really highly trained, very specific to rescue. There's 5, actually, you could say 6 disciplines of rescue that they're required. Just for instance, one is rope, high angle rescue, and then another series is confined space, trench rescue, vehicle and machinery rescue, and then there's a swift water, so it takes a lot of training. There's a lot of really high technical equipment. There are folks that we have within that team, so we consider everyone a rescue technician that goes through that. But along with that, there's actually folks that specialize in certain areas. Like you heard me just speak about the medical portion. So you have someone that exclusive, when it comes to the medical aspect, and then we have what we call search specialists that work the search cams and so on. So it's comprised of very highly trained personnel that are designed to deal with these type of incidents, the natural catastrophic, incidents.
So how many times have you been deployed?
So for Tallahassee, this was actually our first, as far as boots on the ground, multi-day operational periods. We I think during Matthew, we deployed over there on the East Coast, but they stayed in the staging area, which, Matthew kind of played a trick on everyone. But we've had a few outside of declarations, to the state. We've had a few more of like multi jurisdiction, responses to where we've assist other areas with different incidents.
So we're talking about now we're kind of moving into the actual deployment of your team and your role there on the team as a task force leader. You're like in charge of this team. So the hurricane came through our area on October the 10th. And obviously, as we record this podcast, these areas are still dealing with the effects and the aftermath of that. Our thoughts and our prayers are certainly with those communities. We've been we've certainly been on the ground over there. We've seen firsthand what the storm has done. So we definitely want to let them know that we're thinking about them and providing that assistance. So,
Absolutely.
But take us through the deployment. The call, what your role is, and kind of getting that team, how big it is, getting that team ready to motivate and roll out.
Okay. So it all starts, with the Emergency Operating Center for the state of Florida. The nice thing when it comes to the USAR and the deployment is, in most cases, we're able to prepare and plan. Again, our hurricane's out in the Gulf, and we have some time. So what they'll do is they'll send through the FASAR director, which is the Florida Association of Search and Rescue, which kind of oversees when it comes to Florida's assets in regards to the urban search and rescue. They'll send that out, and then he sends an email out to the program managers. And typically what they try to do is to get the status of that team. There's a color code system they call green or red. Green is that you're up, you're ready, and that they're able to activate you through the Emergency Operating Center. If you're red, typically most that are red are lacking something, may have some deficiencies. It could be personnel, or it may be just the fact that they're going to be in that affected area. So, for instance, during Hurricane Michael, we had to stay in the red because we were in that projected cone.
Right.
Once it passed, they got in place, then we could go green to assist. They try to keep those resources in that area, obviously, to be able to take care of their community.
So now, real quick, because you mentioned the two teams in the South were federally funded. So, for example, they would bring in teams from out of state. Are they only bringing in those teams that are federally funded from out of state?
No. So typically what FEMA will do is they have 28 federal teams, and FEMA will actually, for any type of natural disaster, they have what they call incident management teams, and they come in. It's almost like recon, and they will activate certain teams geographically, in certain areas. I believe this was recorded as the largest catastrophic event in the state of Florida for a natural disaster. They actually had over 21 teams. So you can imagine what they try to do is keep them on a rotation.
Okay.
So they really do it based on and kind of just trying to project the extent of the incident.
So, and I'm just trying to get my hands around it because I've never been this granular with it. So I understand the red and the green. So basically, will they strategically use every Florida team, or do they still like to keep some in reserve and bring some people from out of state?
No. So what they'll do is they have, but they not all at one time. So they'll rotate the team. So Florida 1 and 2, just using for example, they go in and they utilize them for a week or two, whatever their needs are. And then if they see a need for more efforts, as far as search and rescue, then they'll bring another team and relieve that team, that Florida 1 and 2, and bring 3 in. And then they just keep rotating on a rotated basis, and the federal teams do the same as well.
So, for example, what is the actual size of the Tallahassee team?
So Tallahassee's team is 22.
Okay.
And that's boots on the ground. Now we have other positions like the program manager, our structural specialist, and then we actually carry our own mechanics. So we had two mechanic, one with a repair vehicle and the other with a fuel. So
And
we have to be.
what about like heavy equipment operators and stuff like that? Do you bring in contractors or people in the team that have actually know how to operate those type of equipment?
Well, we have folks on our team that can operate that equipment. What they typically do is when you get into that area, utilize the resources in that area that's available. Their local resources, their public works, they had heavy equipment there.
Okay.
But these are things that can be requested. Once a team gets to their location and where they're working, it can be requested through their emergency operating center. And that's how they're set up through the essentials functions of 4 and 9 in the state, which oversees search and rescue and then fire. They have access to that, and they're able to get those resources to them.
Chief, in South Florida recently, we've dealt with unfortunately multiple firefighters that have taken their lives. We know in the business, post-traumatic stress disorder, affects police, firefighters, veterans, nurses, but especially with USAR, I mean, it's very real. It looks glamorous, like, to the public, like, oh, wow, the team's going in and they got all this fancy equipment and everything. But like when the camera shuts off, when the work begins, you guys are seeing some horrific stuff. I mean, it's not far-fetched to say you're going to see not only a dead body, but you might see a dismembered body. Absolutely. Or something even worse.
Well, and what you got to remember is, and you're absolutely right, Doug. I mean, you're not, when you think about the type of environment that you're in, and what I mean by that is in most cases you have, heavy structural damage, which from those large debris piles you're going to have, based on the wind conditions, a lot of flying debris. You're going to have flooded areas. So the bodies that are found during these type of deployments are not, that you would see typically, someone with natural cause of death. It's going to be very traumatic, from amputees to, mangled bodies. You're absolutely right. A lot of the teams make note, and that's part of your debriefing or hot wash that we do following each day, to where you have an opportunity to discuss that. If you feel like you have members that need the stress debriefing, then I think, at that point, they provide them with what they need. But you're absolutely right. I mean, it's the type of environments that you're working in it comes across, like you said, to be something that's prestigious.
But is there anything like in place, for example? Listen, I fully understand you have a job that you have to do, but like let's say a crew, runs on 4 people in a row deceased. Does you as a team leader go, all right, you know what, get them out, and just like how does that work? Or it's just, and I'm going to use the term I hate, but I have to use it right now, is suck it up, buttercup.
No, well, the good thing, and I say about a lot of these teams, is that even with them, not all of them working from the same department, they do quite a bit of training together. And I think it's important, like any other, is knowing your people. And I think what it comes down to is exactly that. I mean, from body language to just, communication, is that's where the squad bosses, or even for that matter, even, their other peers, just have to use, good discretion, with that. But in the event, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And that's the nice thing about having the numbers. A lot of the teams are able to alternate, from day to day, personnel. But in the event that happens, yes, you would definitely want to do that.
Jarvis, what areas did you work in? I mean, you guys, you weren't the first team in. We were sort of going in there to relieve the other team. So there had been some searches done in some of those areas. What areas did you end up working in, and what did some of that work look like?
So we worked two different areas in Jackson County for the first 2 days, and which was areas that they that were outside of the eye, to where they showed where the eye hit, just small little pieces. One was in the southeast of the county, and the other was in the northwest. Interesting, making comparison to the two, the southeast obviously suffered a lot more damage. You could see because of where that eye and that side of the eye, the east side of the eye, was really destructive in those areas. A lot of heavily, with tree damage to homes, and we encountered several mobile homes that were heavily damaged. And then the northeast section, the same. I mean, I'd say we still experienced damage, but not to the extent that we did in the southeast corner. Prior to that, we had already teams that had searched and did what they call secondary search. I think we had Indiana one, Ohio was in that area, Mississippi task force was in that area prior to our arrival. So they actually covered the central portion of Jackson County.
And a lot of it is just connecting missing people, right? I mean, we had the opportunity to connect a lot of folks that reported missing that hadn't had a welfare check, and you're able to check those people off the list. So, I mean, there's a lot of happy endings to a lot of those searches, right?
Yes. Yeah. So, during the briefings, every evening we would brief with the division supervisor, which was from FEMA. And you're absolutely right, Mike. What they would do is they would identify areas to where they had a mapping that would identify areas of people that were accounted for, where they found deceased, and folks that weren't accounted for. And that's basically what we did, is they compiled a list, and that's exactly what we did. We would go to most of the homes, and whether we made direct contact, in some cases it would be a neighbor. Oh no, I saw Miss Jones. Yeah, she's fine. She went over to her son's house, So we were able to then make note of that. One of the things that the state of Florida uses, which is nice, and we were able to utilize, is what they call, it's called Survey 123. Anytime that we would go out to an area, we were able to use our cell phone. It's an app to where you have several users, and we're able to ping that address. And not only just to ping that, to show where it is within that grid, we were able to document, put notes in there, and also take a picture, and then send that information. And that information would go to the director of the Emergency Operating Center for Search and Rescue. So they can compile all that and know what areas that were searched, or the areas that they were able to complete as far as welfare checks. What
is the law enforcement component? Do they have like a USAR for law enforcement?
So no, Doug, and that's a very good question, because they call force protection, which is basically security for the teams. We were able to utilize other agencies. We had the National Guard one day, and then we had some folks from the State Fire Marshal's office, some officers from there as well. Most people, that don't know within the community, when they think of search and rescue, is that you're going to have folks that are going to be welcome to see you. And that's not always the case. In a lot of these rural areas, you have folks that are very independent, that don't travel in town. I mean, very minimally, unless they have to, that live by the land for the most part. They don't want people on their property. So now you have a situation where you have looting and folks just trying to get whatever, to satisfy their needs. So it's important to have that security. Absolutely. And that's for every team that enters, areas to search or even do welfare checks, is that they have security with them.
Oh, wow. So that's a great answer, Chief, is that the USAR teams have their own security detail.
Yeah, so they attach those folks, to the USAR. Yes, the Florida Wildlife Commission.
Wow.
Yes.
Now, is there any looting? Did people see looting taking place?
It was interesting to see, though, in some of the and I'll say more in the city areas, a lot of the signs, that you would have residents, you loot, we'll shoot. I think it was very clear to those areas. We didn't hear a whole lot. There was one incident in Jackson County to where they had a gentleman to pull a AR out on one of the task force teams. He had a few to drink and didn't want anyone on his property, and until law enforcement advised him, otherwise. But outside of that, the one experience that we did have, though, and heck, at the time, we had no idea. So when we moved to Gulf County, which was our next mission, we started setting up our base of operations. And I had one of the task force members from Task Force 3 out of the Hillsborough County area to inform us that we need to pay attention, kind of be vigilant while we're out there. There was a lady that confronted the site manager with a pistol looking for FEMA. So you can see how easy something that you're so good and trying to put things in place, how quick it can go bad.
Now, when you say that, is that because I'm disgruntled with FEMA, I want payback?
So, and I don't know the details of what happened, but something happened to the point to where she had to leave her apartment complex. So she felt like she was going to find a FEMA representative and deal with it accordingly. But immediately, they had, security, and they kept law enforcement out there to protect the resources that they had there because of that.
So something that kind of stood out for me, and for most people that are just, average citizens that aren't involved in, these, emergency management operations, is just the amount of coordination that's happening. This system works. The system works very well. And, that emergency operations center that the state sets up, they have all these different support functions within that. They have utilities in there. They have communications in there. They have fire and rescue and law enforcement and EMS. But also they have your charitable organizations like the Red Cross are in the room at the table. They have business and industry is part of the emergency support function group, up there at the Emergency Operations Center. So I do want to give props to, our system. It works very well, and unfortunately, that's because of all the years and decades of devastation we've dealt with hurricanes. But it works well, and the search and rescue function, being out there with these teams from Indiana and teams from Texas and different parts of the country, everybody's basically using the same terminology. We have the same equipment. We have the same level of training. We're able to pair up with these different task forces to become larger units and do different searches. So that's definitely thing one. Thing two, because we're kind of coming to the end here, I wanted you to kind of share with our listeners maybe like a story that stood out for you, or something you experienced that really just grabbed your heartstrings.
Oh, well, it would probably have to be, I want to say it was maybe our first day. The team split up. We were in Mexico Beach, and we were working a rubber pile area with Task Force 3 and K9s. At that point, we were kind of in the transition of rescue to recovery. And there was a young lady that was walking back and forth, and she was at the adjacent property, which was heavily damaged, which we had some concerns there. But she was trying to get some of her belongings, try to salvage her belongings, and she sat there with 3 of our members, one being Mike, and pretty much just explained, the hurt and where she was as far as the loss. And it wasn't just the property, but the memory. She had her sister that had passed, I think, a year ago to cancer. Her brother-in-law was living in the home real close to them there in Mexico Beach. And the storm surge completely destroyed to the point to where I don't even know if they were able to find any memorabilia. It really
you're just dealing with the hopelessness of it. A person.
Well, the most difficult thing at that point is you realize, I mean, what's been done is done. So, at that point, it's whatever we can do to comfort these folks, to let them know that, that we do care. And a lot of it was just, hey, I think we had one gentleman that said, hey, I had a jacket in there. I had a jean jacket, and I had a large sum of money. If you guys can find it, we really appreciate it. And we take that with seriousness. I mean, that's something, that's a way again to show them that we do care.
Yes.
So when we ran into that young lady, it was good to have that conversation with her, and it kind of put things in perspective again to remind ourselves, that those are not just places of the wealth that go there as a second home. I mean, there's a lot of families from generation to generations that had a lot of memories in those places.
Well, I guess from a helpful standpoint, like, of course, we talked about storm surge. We talked about, like, these hurricanes are real deal killers. We just, the days of the hurricane parties and stuff like that. What would you say to listeners as far as, like, okay, you're gonna evacuate here, don't forget this. I know I'm kind of rambling with this question because I really want to try and make it count. Well, it's like I know, like, a lot of people say, like, pictures, they take photo albums, because that's stuff you can't.
Well, and I Doug, and a very good question, man. I mean, I'm going to piggyback on what Mike was, what he spoke on earlier, is the state of Florida, the EOC. I mean, we are a model when it comes to this because of, unfortunately, the type of incidents that we've had over the years. So with that, we're educated in a lot of ways. And I think it's important for people to heed and really listen. There's constantly, prior to hurricane season, I know here in Leon County, and I know it's throughout the state of Florida, they provide you with information, a guideline on what to do to prepare and plan for hurricane season. I think it's important for people to really, really pay attention and listen to that. When they put out the request to evacuate, especially when you look in the Gulf and just historically the hurricanes and how they gain strength because of the water conditions, I think anytime that you have that projection in the Gulf, the Panhandle to South Florida, I think people really, really need to be serious, and I mean to take it serious, and to listen to the authorities and the officials that are giving these announcements. Because, in my personal opinion, we got complacent. And I say we. There were folks that got complacent that felt, okay, I've done it, I've sat through these. And unfortunately, I mean, this was just something that they had never, and still trying to figure out how did it maintain the strength that it did once it hit landfall, which was very, very out of the norm. So it's important, Florida has a lot of experience with a lot of information, education, and when that stuff comes out, whether it's planning or in the event that they have warnings and alerts when they're out in the Gulf, people need to pay attention and listen.
Well, I know you can obviously state that the newer structures, they weathered the storm, so the
Yes.
building codes do work.
Well, Chief, listen, we want to thank you for taking time. This is probably one of my favorite interviews we've done so far. I think we're probably 8 or 9 episodes in with the podcast this year. So thank you for your service.
Well, I thank you guys, for inviting me and allowing the time and just what you guys do on a regular. I've actually listened to several of the podcasts in the past, and I really enjoy it. So thank you guys for your work and keep up the good work.
All right, Chief. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
All right. Thanks for listening to this latest episode of the Doug and Mike Show. Remember to check us out on Instagram and everywhere online. We will check you out next time. Have an awesome day.